everyone, my name is Thomas. Today I'm going to be doing a little lesson on finding historical sources. So the difference when you're researching between a primary source and a secondary source. Primary sources are taken directly from that time. They're usually letters, articles, diaries, photographs, stuff that was directly taken from the point in history that you're researching. A secondary source is anything that is written or that is it's basically just about that time period, but from a more of a modern time. So a lot of times these are articles, websites, essays, things that people wrote about that time period that they're also researching just like we are. It's important to differentiate because primary sources are more credible. They're taken directly from the source, and you're not playing a game of telephone with historians where there might be an alternate agenda when you're displaying your information. So most teachers and professors will probably ask you to get primary and secondary, and I'm not trying to knock secondary at all because it's really important and valuable when you can get a modern perspective of a point in history. For example, we are going to look into the era of Prohibition, which was the 1920s, a lot of times referred to as the Roaring Twenties or the Golden Era. There's a ton of great history that was going on with F. Scott Fitzgerald writing The Great Gatsby, and just a few years before was the Titanic and World War I. So there was a lot of stuff going on, but for this example, Prohibition, this is when bootleggers were making millions off of selling moonshine and other illegal alcohol that they were making. I'm going to find one primary and one secondary source. So the first step when you're doing research is go into a historical database. I listed here JSTOR, Gale, ProQuest, and Google as examples that you could use. I will say be really careful with Google, because Google, a lot of crap comes up when you search on Google. And I just did it actually. On my computer, I was researching Prohibition, and there's a specifically a filter that you can put on your search that'll bring up only peer-reviewed articles. So they'd still be scholarly sources. So, there's nothing wrong with that, but you have to make sure that you use that, because otherwise it's just going to bring you up thousands, if not millions, of random, anything that has the word prohibition in it will just pop up, and it's going to be a lot of junk. So the primary source that I found is a magazine article called Toasting the New Year Prohibition Style. This was in 1923. It came out in the New York Times. You'll notice that I cited it here, APA style citing. That's not the law. You can use MLA, you can use APA, you can use Chicago. Ask your teacher, ask your professor. It's going to be up to them, really. So one reminder about primary sources is that when you're looking on databases, you can usually use some kind of a filter that will only give you primary sources. I highly recommend that. You'll save yourself so much time not having to sift through thousands and thousands of articles and magazines and books and blah, 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 all the stuff that comes up. For a secondary source, I found a book called Prohibition Gangsters, The Rise and Fall of a Bad Generation. It's a book written in 2013 by Mark Mappin, but is really interesting. I just read a little bit of it, and it's so fascinating talking about the gangsters and Al Capone and all the bootlegging and the crime that was going around. And this is a great example of how a modern perspective of a historical time is super valuable, because this was stuff that they probably didn't even know was going on quite yet during the 20s. I'm sure they had an idea. Al Capone was famous then as he is now, but on the scale that we now know was going on, was probably not aware in the 20s. Always make sure to cite your sources. It's really important to have a bibliography. Sometimes you'll want an annotated one where you include a little summary of each source, but generally just all the sources. And again, APA, MLA, Chicago, whatever your teacher wants. So now I'm going to have you guys try it on your own. Pick a topic, research one of those mentioned databases. There's tons out there, but I can advocate for JSTOR and Gale and the other ones that I talked about. Usually always try and find primary and secondary, cite them, and enjoy learning about history.